The moment you see the expression change, something drops in you, not dramatically, just a small sinking somewhere below the ribs. The expression could be a pause that lasts a beat too long, a slight flatness in the eyes that was not there a moment ago, a reply that arrives with less warmth than the previous one, and the moment it registers, your mind is already moving backward through the last hour, the last conversation, scanning for what you said or failed to say, what you did or neglected to do, where exactly you fell short this time. You assemble the evidence of your inadequacy before you have confirmed there is a case to be made, and then the apology forms, sometimes spoken. Sorry, I didn't think about how that would land. Sometimes only internal, a contraction, bracing, making yourself smaller, that no one can see, but that you feel clearly in the body. You scan the room before you have done anything wrong. You apologize before you know what you are apologizing for. You make yourself smaller before anyone has indicated that your current size is a problem. And the most remarkable thing about this, if you could see it from a slight distance, the expression you are reading might have had nothing to do with you at all. The pause might have been thought. The flatness might have been their own interior weather, entirely unrelated to your presence. The cooler reply might have been the 100th thing on their mind, not the first. But your interpretation engine did not wait for that information. It ran the calculation it always runs, and arrived at the conclusion it always arrives at. You fell short. You disappointed them. You are, in some persistent and specific way, that even your own trying cannot seem to resolve, not enough. This is not one bad day, it is a pattern. It lives underneath dozens of moments each week. At work, where you replay the meeting afterward, finding every place your contribution could have been sharper, every sentence that might have landed differently. At home, where a quiet look reads to you as withdrawal, and withdrawal reads as dissatisfaction, and dissatisfaction becomes yet another confirmation. Something you have been quietly afraid of for a very long time. In conversations that contain no conflict, no friction, nothing overtly wrong, and yet in which some part of you is still waiting for the moment when the other person realizes you are less than they thought. And the trying, the enormous, exhausting trying, not from passion, not from genuine desire, but from the specific dread of landing in that sinking place again. You give more. You show up more carefully. You work harder, not because the work pulls you forward with honest energy, but because harder work offers the temporary relief of feeling like you are doing something about the verdict. And it helps, sometimes. The approval arrives, the reassurance settles, the feeling quiets, and then it returns, and you try harder. And the cycle continues. Because the source of the feeling was never your performance, you are not disappointing everything. You are living inside a filter that reads most things as disappointment, and that distinction between what is actually happening and what the filter reports is the difference between a life spent trying to outrun a verdict and a life spent building something real. There is a kind of awareness that never turns off. It is always running a background scan, reading faces, measuring silences, interpreting the small adjustments in how people present themselves when you are in the room. A slight pause in someone's message response. The way a compliment is worded that makes you wonder if the qualifier means more than the praise. The expression that crosses someone's face in a meeting and that you immediately, automatically interpret as a response to you, even when you have said nothing, done nothing, simply occupied the room. You are fluent in the language of other people's expressions. You have been studying it for a very long time, and you have become extraordinarily accurate at one specific reading. The reading that says, in the particular silence after you have spoken, in the face that does not quite soften the way you hoped, there it is, disappointment. Again. The problem with this fluency is not the reading itself. The problem is that the instrument is calibrated wrong, and an instrument calibrated wrong does not produce random errors. It produces consistent ones, always in the same direction. It produces a bias, reliable and repeatable, a way of perceiving the world that confirms the same conclusion regardless of what the actual data would support. Think of the archer whose sight has been incorrectly calibrated. The bow is sound, the arrows are straight, the release is clean and practiced, and yet every arrow misses the mark, always in the same direction, slightly to the left, slight height, consistently off, not from incompetence, not from laziness, from a point of reference that was set incorrectly before the training began. The archer who keeps missing will often blame the release, the stance, the breath, everything that is visible and adjustable in the moment of the shot. But the error is not in the shot, it is in the sight, and no amount of changing the shot will correct the problem that lives in the point of reference. You have been adjusting your shot for years. You have been refining the release, working harder, communicating more carefully, giving more, being more present, trying to eliminate every possible reason for the disappointment you are sure is coming, and the arrows keep missing, not because you are a poor archer, because the sight that tells you where the mark is has been miscalibrated, since before you understood that calibration was something that could be adjusted. This was not weakness through the ethical speaking, it was intelligence under pressure, to develop a finely tuned sensitivity to other people's emotional states. To learn quickly and accurately to read the room is a genuine capability. It was built in response to something real. At some point, the emotional states of the people around you mattered in a way that required constant monitoring. Their approval had real consequences. Their disappointment had a cost you needed to anticipate and, if possible, prevent. And so you learned to read the signs early, to catch the expression before it settled into something harder, to act on the first signal rather than waiting for the situation to solidify. That was intelligent. It was survival-level intelligence, but the threat it was built to navigate no longer exists in the same form, and the instrument built for that threat is still running in a world that no longer requires it, and it is still finding what it was trained to find, because it does not know how to update itself automatically. It only knows the pattern it was calibrated to, and it applies that pattern to everything. Caring about how others experience you is not the same as being responsible for every feeling they have. Being attentive to the room is not the same as being required to be whoever the room needs you to be. Receiving feedback is not the same as absorbing a verdict. These distinctions are not small. They are the entire distance between a life spent as a permanent defendant and a life in which other people's feelings are real and important, but not the final word on who you are. Begin quietly. The next time you catch yourself scanning a face for signs of disappointment, pause before you interpret. Notice that you are reading, and ask, just once, as a genuine question, is this what is actually there? Or is this what the instrument has been trained to find? You do not have to change the answer. Only notice the space between the reading and the conclusion. That space is where something else can begin. And once you see the instrument's bias clearly, the deeper question becomes unavoidable. Where was the sight calibrated? Who set the original reference point and why? The feeling of disappointing everyone rarely comes from everyone. It comes from somewhere specific. It comes from one voice, sometimes one face, one relationship, one recurring experience early in your life, whose disappointment landed with particular force, whose expectations felt less like preferences and more like requirements, whose approval was close enough to feel possibly achievable and far enough that it was never quite reached, and that operating from its own wounds and pressures and incompleteness, installed a standard in you, not consciously, not cruelly necessarily, but powerfully because the stakes were high and you were young, and the people around you were the entire world. And here is what happens to a standard installed that way. It generalizes, it spreads, it moves from the specific person who set it to the entire category of people around you. And eventually the standard is no longer theirs, it is yours. or rather, it feels like yours, because you have been living inside it for long enough that you can no longer find the seam between the standard that was given and the self that received it. The voice that says not enough no longer sounds like anyone in particular. It simply sounds like the truth. This is not weakness. It was intelligence under pressure. A child who internalizes the expectations of the most significant people in their world is doing something deeply reasonable. The expectations of those people govern the quality and safety of the child's life. Taking them on is not failure. It is adaptation of the most fundamental kind. But an internalized standard does not come with an automatic expiration date. It does not review itself when the circumstances change. It continues running in the most background with exactly the force it had when it was installed. Even after the person who set it is no longer in the room, no longer in your daily life, no longer the authority on your worth that they once were. Think of the soldier who has been fighting for so long that the war has ended before the news reached the front line. The orders were real once. The threat was real. The threat was real. Discipline and vigilance required were exactly right for the conditions that existed. But the conditions have changed and the soldier doesn't know, and so the soldier continues, preparing for battles that are no longer scheduled, reading signals that are no longer relevant, living on a war footing in what is now, for everyone else, a time of peace, not from failure, not from stupidity, from the absence of updated information and the loyalty to a reality that was once entirely accurate. You may be fighting a war that has been over for longer than you realize, living on alert for a disappointment that was once consequential and is no longer, in the same way, the threat it used to be, carrying a standard that was once someone else's and has since become so deeply internal that you no longer remember it was ever then grown. You may not be responsible for how that standard was installed, but you are responsible for what you continue to measure yourself against. These are not the same burden. One was placed on you before you had the capacity to evaluate it. The other is something only you can now choose to examine. Your suffering is not false. Some wounds are real, the exhaustion of never quite measuring up, of working harder and giving more and still carrying the low-grade certainty that something in you is insufficient. That is a real wound. It is quiet and private, and it has been running for so long that you have stopped noticing the effort it takes to keep carrying it. But it is real, and it deserves to be named as real. Begin quietly. Sit alone and ask, not as an accusation, not with bitterness, but as a genuine act of inquiry. Whose voice is the one that says not enough? Not everyone's voice. One voice. Maybe more than one, but specific. Name them, not to blame them, but to see that the standard has an origin, that it was given, not discovered, that it belongs to a particular moment, a particular relationship, a particular set of conditions, and not necessarily to you. And once you can see where the standard came from, the deepest layer reveals itself. The moment the feeling moved from I disappointed someone to I am a disappointment. These are not the same statement. They are separated by a vast and consequential distance. I disappointed someone is a specific, bounded, often accurate observation about one interaction between two people. It says, in this moment my action or inaction did not meet this person's expectation. That may be true. It may be useful information. It may be worth sitting with and learning from. I am a disappointment is something entirely different. It is not a description of a specific event. It is a verdict on the self. It says, the fundamental problem is not what I did. It is what I am. And that verdict, once it has been accepted, colors everything. Every future event is filtered through it. Every criticism confirms it. Every silence becomes more evidence. Every moment of falling short, and everyone falls short always in some way, becomes another installment in a case that was closed before the evidence began. Do not hate yourself for having accepted that verdict. Hatred is another cage, and you are already in enough confinement. The acceptance happened gradually, under conditions that made it feel like realism rather than error. It felt like honesty about your actual nature. It felt like finally being clear-eyed about the gap between who you are and who you ought to be. But a verdict is not the same as the truth. A verdict is a conclusion reached within a particular system by a particular set of judges under a particular set of rules, and the system, the judges, and the rules all matter enormously. If the system was rigged, if the standard was impossible, the judges were operating from their own wounds. The rules were designed for a different kind of person than you actually are. Then the verdict, however convincingly it arrived, is not the final word. Think of an oak tree being measured for whether it produces apples. By this measure, the oak fails entirely and always. It produces no apples, not a single one. It has never produced an apple, not in its entire life. And if you told the oak that its fundamental purpose is the production of apples, the oak would, by every available metric, be a profound and consistent disappointment. But the oak is not failing to be an apple tree. The oak is succeeding fully at being an oak. The failure lives in the measuring, in the imposition of a standard that was never appropriate to the thing being measured. You have been measured many times by standards that were not written with you in mind, by people who needed a particular kind of person and found someone different, by expectations that were born from another person's fears or wounds or unmet needs, things that had nothing to do with your actual value and everything to do with what the other person required. The measurement said insufficient, but the measurement was not measuring you accurately. It was measuring you against a template you were never designed to match. Can you disappoint someone and still respect yourself? Can you receive criticism, real criticism, honest and fair, and let it inform you without letting it define you? Can you fall short of someone's expectation and understand clearly that falling short of an expectation is not the same as being fundamentally insufficient? Can you stand in the evidence of your imperfection, something that is still whole? These are not rhetorical questions. They are the actual practice. They are the training that transforms the pattern, not by eliminating your sensitivity to others, which would make you less human, but by developing, alongside that sensitivity, something stable enough that the sensitivity does not take you entirely. Begin quietly. The next time the sinking feeling arrives, the one that says, in the pause after you have spoken, "I have disappointed them," wait before accepting the interpretation, not to fight it, only to hold it lightly, with one question: is this a specific thing that happened, or is it a verdict running? Notice the difference. That noticing, even once, even briefly, creates a space that was not there before. And once you begin to make that distinction between the specific event and the verdict, every ordinary day becomes a different kind of practice ground, because the feeling of disappointing everyone is not resolved in one conversation. Not in one moment of clarity, however important. It is resolved, if that is even the right word, in the accumulation of small ordinary moments in which you choose again and again to receive what is in front of you without automatically running it through the filter that has always been preset to find you insufficient. The interaction at work where someone gives you feedback, the old pattern would fold. The feedback immediately into the verdict. See, not enough, just as I knew. The new practice is different, slower, more effortful, ultimately more honest. The new practice receives the feedback as specific information about this specific thing, not as confirmation of a conclusion that was reached before the feedback existed. It asks, what exactly is being said here? Is it accurate? Is it useful? What specifically can I do with it? And it answers those questions from a ground that is stable enough not to collapse under the weight of a critique. This is not the same as becoming indifferent to others' feelings. That is one extreme, the person who has armored themselves so completely against others' disappointment that no feedback can land, no criticism can penetrate to what is actually there. That is not freedom, that is a different kind of prison. Equally lonely, equally limited. And the other extreme, the one you have been living in, is the person whose inner stability depends entirely on the approval of the room, whose sense of their own value shifts with every expression that crosses another person's face, who has no ground to stand on that exists independent of being seen as sufficient. Between these two is the practitioner's path, the one who can be affected genuinely, moved, genuinely touched by feedback, genuinely present to others' experience, without being destroyed by it. The one who can receive criticism and separate what is true from what is the other person's wound, without becoming defensive or collapsed. The one who holds their own standard, not a rigid or self-protective one, but a genuine one, alongside their attention to how others are. Think of a mountain and the weather that passes over it. The mountain is not indifferent to weather. Rain changes it slowly. Wind marks its surface. Seasons alter what grows on it. The mountain is genuinely affected by what passes over it. But the mountain does not confuse the weather for itself. The cloud does not tell the mountain what it is. The storm does not issue a verdict that the mountain then carries for the next decade. The mountain is what it is, weathered and changed by what passes, but not defined by any single season. Its nature does not depend on the sky being clear. You are being invited to become like this, not unmoved, not unaffected, not armored against the people around you, closed to their experience, indifferent to what your actions produce in the world, but stable in a way that the weather cannot take from you, stable enough that when the storm passes and someone says in that passage that you have disappointed them, you can receive that as information about the storm rather than a permanent description of the mountain. Begin quietly in one interaction today, only one. Try to separate what is being said from what the verdict would make of it. Let the words be just words. Let the feedback be just feedback. Notice what remains in you after you have heard it clearly and set aside what the filter would add to it. That remainder is your actual ground, and it is steadier than the filter has been telling you. The exhaustion of constantly falling short of an impossible standard does not end by performing better. It does not end by finally meeting the expectation that has always retreated just beyond your reach. It ends quietly, gradually, without announcement, by releasing the authority of the standard that was never entirely yours. You remove the impossibly calibrated sight, and what you can actually aim for becomes visible. Smaller perhaps, but real. Achievable not in spite of who you are, but because of it. You release the verdict that was handed to you by someone who was themselves operating from a wound, not with bitterness, not with the conclusion that they were wrong about everything, but with the clear-eyed understanding that their disappointment was information about their expectations, not final evidence of your worth. You stop confusing the silence in the room with judgment, and the room becomes livable. You stop scanning every face for the expression that confirms the old conclusion, and you become, slowly, able to actually see the people in the room, what they actually feel, not what the filter needs them to feel. Think of the root system that holds the great tree through the storm. The storm is real. The wind is strong, the tree bends, genuinely, sometimes dramatically, in ways that seem to threaten the whole. But the roots hold, not because the roots are rigid, not because they resist the wind, but because they are deep enough and wide enough that the storm, however fierce, does not reach the place where the tree's actual stability lives. The roots are underground, invisible, built quietly over time through the ordinary work of growing in the direction of what the tree actually needs. And it is those roots, not the appearance of the canopy, not the approval of the sky, that determine whether the tree survives the storm. That is the inner fortress, not the wall that keeps others' opinions out, not the armor that prevents anything from reaching you, but the root system deep enough that the storm cannot reach what is most essential, the ground within you that exists and is real independent of who happens to be satisfied with you today. That ground is not built by becoming indifferent. It is built by repeatedly choosing, in small and ordinary moments, to receive what is real without letting the filter add what is not, by allowing the actual feedback, honest, fair, specific, to inform your choices while refusing to allow the verdict, totalizing, preset, belonging to someone else's wounds to have the last word on who you are. Let your life become the evidence, not the declaration that you have stopped caring what others think, which would be its own form of performance, its own kind of posturing, but the actual quality of your choices in the small moments, the steadiness with which you can stand in someone's disappointment without collapsing into it or fighting it from defensiveness, the way you can receive honest criticism and let it teach you something without letting it sentence you. The relationship in which you are genuinely yourself, imperfect, real, sometimes falling short, and in which the ground of that relationship does not shake every time you do. You are not a disappointment. You are a person who was handed an impossible measure and has been applying it faithfully, honestly, and with extraordinary effort ever since. The faithfulness was never the problem. The measure was, and measures can be changed. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in the space between one verdict and the next, in the moment you pause before accepting the conclusion. In that space, something quietly begins to shift. The sight begins to recalibrate. The arrows begin to land closer to what is actually there. That is enough. That ja, this is